and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm your host today, of course. I'm joined by my usual partner in crime, Samuel Luckhurst. We're going to sink our teeth into the latest Manchester United news, mostly with a big prominent story across the weekend of Omar Berrada's switch from Manchester City across to Old Trafford. So not too far away from the Etihad. But Samuel, a big story across the weekend. What were you doing?
Well, I was not doing a great deal at all at the time. It was, as people who live in this country know, it's not been the best of weather over the weekend, and it was a quiet one. But when the news emerged, obviously, I think we were all awaiting a statement at some point from United, and it came quite belatedly, which was, I suppose, rather in keeping with the way they operate. But it's a coup for them. It was an open goal, and they took their time trying to shape up a shot and try and take it, but it felt like they missed it in that sense. But the actual the appointment is, as we'll get on, is positive.
Well, you just described it as a coup. It does seem like that. It does seem very significant. A very well respected figure in the industry. He's done some fantastic work with Manchester City, who of course we don't need to remind anyone have been England's leading football team. There have been some allegations over some financial misplay, shall we say, but we might get onto that a bit later. But anyways, a fantastic appointment, or it should be, to become Manchester United's new CEO.
Well, I think it's a real statement of intent from INEOS. I mean, it was quite amusing, this attempt to, although it's because of the fact that the regulatory approval hasn't been granted, that the Glazers are still the decision makers, the power brokers, as if, okay, this is technically a Glazer decision, but it's INEOS saying, this is our chief executive. Can you announce that he's going to be appointed? It's the end of the Glazer rule at Manchester United, and I think there were a lot of supporters of certain demographics who were sceptical of Sir Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS because they were pro Qatar. For geopolitical reasons, or just they saw the money and they thought that's going to be the panacea for all the ills, even though there's FFP and profitability and sustainability rules as well to factor in. But INEOS, they do know what they're doing. They've embarked on sporting ventures before, and I think this is confirmation that they know what they're doing, because it seemed like a very smart appointment. Berrada's been at City for nearly 11 years. I don't think you survive in that environment that long unless you're doing a good job. He clearly went there at a similar time to Ferran Soriano and Chiqui Begiristain, where essentially they were trying to get the people in place ahead of Guardiola's appointment. I mean, there was a lot of legwork that went into appointing Guardiola. Possibly there were discussions that were held before he was even appointed by Munich coach in early 2013. City did a hell of a lot of work to ensure that he would come in, and Pellegrini was obviously that stopgap as well for over a 3-year period. And City, as you say, have been the best in class in just about everything, whether it's running a football club, whether it's having stadium expansion, a new training ground, recruitment, the coach, the way they play. And yes, that could all drag them down to the National League if these 115 charges stick. And clearly there's something awry there, and it's been in the works for quite some time. Obviously, they were banned from the Champions League by UEFA, but then their appeal was successful on the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And look, I think people are always going to say, however good City are, however great they are, and they have been a great side, that mud sticks, and they've got these.
At the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that's possibly why a lot of United fans are relatively sanguine when City do well, because there is this sense that it's tainted by alleged book cooking, but we'll see where they get, how far they get along, or when it actually is heard by the Premier League, these 115 charges. But despite that, and despite the state ownership, which morally there are issues there that have been well documented, as a football club, if you are judging them as a football club, they are extremely impressive. You can't help but be impressed by them. And taking their, I think he's the chief football operations officer, or he was, taking him from Manchester City, that's a statement of intent. You want best in class, and that's why they want Dan Ashworth, because he's one of the best sporting directors around, and that's got to be the level of ambition at United. You've got to be going for the best in class and the best available figures to go into heading up certain departments, and it also had to be an external candidate. You couldn't have a Glazer stooge there.
A Bristol University graduate coming in, Ed Woodward.
Yeah, we weren't going to have Matt Judge coming back into the fold or anything like that. Everyone's had their fill of that, and look, one of the biggest reasons why United are still in the mess they are at the moment is because of Ed Woodward, because he was not up to the job and he went about the job in completely the wrong way. Obviously, Richard Arnold, he wasn't even chief executive for 2 years, but he was at Manchester United from 2007 to 2023. And although he was a better chief executive or figurehead than Woodward, it wasn't exactly difficult, and he jumped before he was pushed. And look, there are going to be other. We've spoken before about the sweeping changes that INEOS are planning. They've started from the top. You'd think now, having got a chief executive in, the next role has got to be in this structure, a sporting director, because you've got at INEOS Jean-Claude Blanc, who I think is the sporting chief executive, and you've got Sir Dave Brailsford, who's the sporting director of INEOS. Obviously, Berrada will report into Jean-Claude Blanc. You're going to need a sporting director now to report into Dave Brailsford, and that's the next step for INEOS, and it's the right way of going about it. They had to address the structure first. The manager, there are issues aplenty with, but he was never going to get sacked right now, and I think that's overall that's a logical way of going about it. I know there is an argument, or was an argument, that a change of manager may have been advisable, but I think they're going about it the right way, and they're doing this before they've even received regulatory approval. I mean, this is, you only had to look at that statement that was very belated when it came out on Saturday evening. That's what I meant about United missing an open goal there, because I think from a comms perspective, they didn't react with the alacrity they should do to poaching someone from Manchester City, and it was quite a significant addition as well from City. But you read that statement, that is not a statement that's been run.
We'll come on to that in a second. It's a jump up, isn't it, for Berrada, because of the work he's been doing at City. It is a promotion, basically. But everything he's been doing at Manchester City will feed into this role, and he has got the skill set to become a CEO. Obviously, the work he's been doing at the Etihad. The statement itself, then, the direct quote was, "Put football and performance on the pitch back at the heart of everything we do." That is not a Glazer statement. And it's an acknowledgement of the failures of the last 10 years as well, isn't it? It's saying, look, we have got things wrong and we want to change.
Yeah, and listen to your podcast with Rich on Friday, when I think it was brought up, that quote by Woodward about how playing performance doesn't affect what we can do on the commercial side. That is how United have operated for far too long. And I said to someone who used to work at the club, I said, have you not realised that, because they kept on reiterating the football is the priority, the football is the priority, and I said, have you not realised that the more you say that, the less people believe it? Because if you keep on having to stress to people that football club's priority is the football, something is really not.
And all the end of quarter meetings, when they kind of speak to shareholders, and we obviously privy to some of those, and you get on the calls, it's all just about financial results, obviously. And to talk about the performance on the pitch, we might be sixth in the league, but we're top of the engagement charts, or we're top of the financial charts. Yeah. And that just really tested fans' patience, that, didn't it? Because if you say we're fifth in the league, sixth in the league, and you can't be celebrating financial results. Yeah,
and they changed the script on that. They used to they changed it so that Woodward spoke on the football matters, and then Richard Arnold would get to brag about the app rating and how many shirts they've sold and things like that. Essentially, they threw Richard Arnold under the bus instead. And look, there was some very look, football can make some very. It never ceases to amaze how many people in football who are very successful have got more money than God. They go into football, and football makes them look stupid. And it did that with Woodward. It did that with Richard Arnold. And obviously, Jim Ratcliffe will be conscious of that as well. He's been an extraordinarily successful individual. And if you dip your toe into football.
Probably not particularly in football yet, Samuel. If you look at Lausanne, who I did a feature on the weekend, his time in Switzerland, that was his first adventure in the sport. Obviously for OG Nice, they're starting to pick up a bit this season, but they have had mixed results in a few managers come and go. But it's felt like those clubs have been the stepping stone to Manchester United, and he's probably learned from those mistakes, and he's now getting the right people in place, and those experiences are only going to stand INEOS and Ratcliffe in good stead.
Yeah, and I don't think, nobody outside Lausanne is going to care about what's going on at Lausanne, and that's probably the case with.
You're trying to say no one cared about my article, Samuel? Is that what you're trying to say?
No. It was an illuminating read. But of course, when you go into Man United, you've got to brace yourself for a number of reasons, and whether it's Ratcliffe or Dave Brailsford, their reputation, they're putting their reputations on the line, essentially, because the perception at Manchester United from anywhere else is completely different. And as I've said before, I maintain it's not the biggest football club in the world. I'd always say that's Real Madrid, but it is by far and away the most scrutinised sporting entity on the planet, by far and away.
So worth talking about that kind of multi-club ownership briefly then, because, I mean, as I said, INEOS and a few other clubs have obviously got investments in other sports. But Berrada, I mean, the Manchester City Football Group, they've kind of got clubs all over the world now. Girona as well, they're flying in La Liga. I think he was involved in a bit of their success through City Football Group. So could his experience be a part of why he was so attractive to become a CEO? Do you think a multi-club structure is going to be kind of part of Ratcliffe's thinking with United? Could we see players maybe going on loan or use them as a feeder club?
I don't know if the workmen outside trying to drown out your question or your response. Yeah, possibly. I still think that with City and that Abu Dhabi takeover in 2008, they hadn't won a trophy since 1976. United are a different beast altogether. I mean, maybe that's INEOS's intention, to have them under this umbrella of football clubs scattered across the globe, but it's almost like this is a dreadful analogy, but it's almost like the DC universe and trying to cobble together Batman in with Aquaman and Green Lantern, when you just leave Batman on his own because it's a big enough character, it's a big enough franchise.
Can you do your Batman impression, since we had a Van Gaal impression on the previous podcast?
Well, it depends which one. Is it Keaton? Is it Bale? Is it Pattinson? But no, I won't get into that one. I think if anything, I think my Bane impression it probably would trump my Christian Bale Batman impression, but I'm not going to do that either. And yeah, obviously it helps that Berrada has got experience of in a wide range of sectors, and it was fascinating reading his interview he did with Cy Bajkowski, I think in September 2020, which of course was an interesting time to say the least, given the pandemic and the financial issues clubs encountered, and also I suppose the general dismay that football clubs were still spending. Certainly in City's case, they still spent over £100 million, whilst businesses, the NHS were decimated, and other and families had monetary issues, understandably. And he came across, reading that interview, and it's quite a lengthy interview as well. He came across really well, touched upon recruitment quite heavily, and I think the first words he said on recruitment are, "We spend smart." And I think some United fans have gone into his Twitter history at the weekend to see what he said about them in the previous.
He posted an article in, was it 2014, and it was
Manchester United spend more than 25 million, overspend by 25 million on Angel Di Maria and things like that.
United, how did United get in this mess? I think was the headline, and he posted the article.
Yeah. I think it's quite the set of cojones on him to do that, given that.
I like that though. I mean, he was showing a bit of personality.
I think clearly someone at some point told him to stop doing that, because of his prominent position.
Airbrushed era, but you could still kind of show a bit of personality on social media in 2013.
Yeah, and it clearly flew under the radar because nobody had heard of him, and pretty much every United fan wouldn't have heard of him until Saturday tea time as well. But look, City are proof that they know what they're doing. They know how to run a football club properly. They've been the polar opposite to United over the past decade. It has been like night and day, and that's reflected in terms of both clubs' performances. City have won the title how many times? What is it? 5 or 6 since Sir Alex Ferguson retired. They've got to 2 Champions League finals. They've won the Champions League. They've won 2 FA Cups. They've won God knows how many League Cups as well. United, it's 2 League Cups, an FA Cup and a Europa League. There's reason for that, because City have put the best in class at every level that really matters. United have not been about that. It's been about who's compliant, who's on our doorstep, who's not going to rock the boat. It's not got them. It's not gone very far at all.
Seems relatively media savvy, I'd say. I was searching some interviews on Sunday. Obviously, I was out on Saturday night, as we just discussed before this podcast, but doing a little bit of research.
Is that why you didn't respond to the message? Is anyone on this?
I just had to get my excuse in there, basically.
In fairness, you were off, I was off, and I ended up
Was
doing
Ty
it.
the last on shift?
Yeah, but he was quite happy watching The Masked Singer or whatever it was.
He's to blame in this scenario. But there is a fair few interviews out there for Berrada, and he talks quite well. He does seem like a very good communicator. We saw Ratcliffe come in, and I mean, the deal hasn't even been officially signed off by the Premier League yet, but he's already communicated more than the Glazers have in the last 18 years. And this seems like a positive new thing with INEOS and Ratcliffe, where we're actually, Samuel, getting some communication from the football club. And although Berrada won't start until the summer, I do get the impression that he will go on record and will do some interviews about where he sees the club going, his vision, etc., which again can only be promising.
Yeah, and as I said, he spoke on the record to the MEN in September, in 2020. John Murtagh, Richard Arnold, Ed Woodward, in terms of manager sit-downs, they've not done that with the MEN, and that's because the comms department at United isn't at the level that it should be, whereas City's comms department, they know what they're doing, or certainly they've got a better grasp on how to go about things. And there is a different dynamic there as well, in that City still see themselves as more of the more Manchester club, because they say, look, we're in Manchester. United, they're not even in Manchester. They're in Trafford or Stretford, and I get all that, but it is strange the way United have gone about it. Like I think it's common knowledge that we did have sit downs with Woodward, but they weren't on the record. He went on the record with a fanzine, which was not knocking that at all whatsoever, but we were all perplexed as to why he'd go on the record with a fanzine, but he wouldn't go on the record with the national press or national media or Manchester Evening News.
I mean, people can make their own calculations or conclusions why that is, surely.
Yeah, I suppose so. I see. It took me a while to twig there, but as you said, look, the important thing is communication. That was one of the issues with Sheikh Hassan. He was, I can't do it justice, but a season ticket holder. I've met him a number of times. He travels home and away. Paul Finlay, when the news emerged that Qatar had withdrawn, he said, imagine being upset that we're not being bought by some bloke from the Middle East who seemed about as real and genuine as Santa Claus.
Well, our podcast producers who was sitting in this room, he did laugh with us last week. Was he even real? Was he just...
That's the thing, yeah, that's the thing. And look, it seems like they've reacted badly to the SEC filings, saying that they couldn't provide proof of funds last week, and it's all ancient history now. I mean, frankly, I don't care. I don't think anybody really cares, because they're not going to be buying Manchester United. That their pitch it ticked every box, but the guy, he was almost like a phantasm. Nobody could doorstep him. Nobody could, normally you can even doorstep the Glazers.
But you did find his Instagram.
I did,
was a revelation last week.
Yes, I did. I managed to track him down as far as that, and he did not accept my follow request, unsurprisingly. But even Avram Glazer, he was at Davos last week. You could doorstep him, but you can't doorstep Sheikh Hassan. So the fact that Ratcliffe has, as you say, he's already been communicative with the supporters and journalists, and that they've not wasted much time whatsoever. I mean, it's not even been a month since the Christmas Eve announcement that INEOS were coming in, and already they've settled on what would appear to be a very smart and impressive choice of chief executive for the club.
Completely agree. We'll leave it there for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, just a quick mention to Tyrone Marshall's and Rich Fay's midweek show. I'm led to believe it's called Rough and Ready, Samuel, after talking to Rich on the last podcast, which is an interesting name. But they'll be back in the middle of the week, and as I've mentioned a few times now, me and Samuel have the start and the end of the week, so the Monday and the Friday on the Manchester is Red podcast. My headline for a piece yesterday is, you've just discussed Dan Ashworth there and the importance of getting a sporting director in next. I feel like that's the last piece of the jigsaw coming in now. You've got Berrada there. We're starting to see this hierarchy.
They're going to need a few players in the summer.
Well, I think so. I think that's quite obvious, to be fair.
I think the jigsaw has got one big piece in, and then maybe another big piece, and then there are quite a few others too.
We'll take a trip to Harrods and buy a few jigsaws, because I think that's what we're going to need. But Dan Ashworth, we've talked about a few times on this podcast. He's obviously in the North East with Newcastle. We've talked about his work with West Brom, with England, with Brighton, of course. He's fantastic. INEOS, this kind of phrase keeps getting thrown around, the best in class. Berrada fits that profile. Ashworth does too. He would be a huge appointment, and an equal coup, as we've just discussed, with Berrada coming in.
He would be, yeah. And it will be interesting to see how swift, or whether it takes a bit of time for INEOS to get a sporting director in. But they do need someone who's going to be known. It's not going to be like Berrada, I don't think. Omar Berrada, as I said earlier, very few people outside the city, I think, certainly as far as sports go, will have heard of him. But that's different from a sporting director. Most people know who the most reputable sporting directors or head of recruitment, whatever you want to call them, directors of football in the world are. And it's obviously in INEOS's and United's interest that they get someone in who's going to be really on the ball, who's got the clout, who's got the CV, and knows what they're doing. And look, with John Murtagh, since he took over as football director at United, you only have to look at the signings and the way they've gone about some of those signings to know that he's not. I don't think he's taken full ownership of it. Which, if you're going to be the guy overseeing recruitment already, you're on shaky ground there, I think.
Well, Murtagh's progression's been really interesting, hasn't it? Because he started off evident in the roles, the different positions that he's kind of had along the way wouldn't traditionally be your route to becoming football director at Manchester United. And it's always been, the implications being that he never intended to be so heavily involved in recruitment either. And he ended up in this role.
Yeah, that's what I was told. And look, at which point you think, well, should he have said something? But if you're getting offered that job, would you say anything? Look, again, we come back to Ed Woodward. It was his call, and he was telling us 2 years earlier that we're close to appointing a technical director. They didn't, and then 2 years later, it's a football director and a technical director. And I think it was quite an innovative way of going about it. And Darren Fletcher is still in that role, and he's like the conduit between the academy and the first team, and he sits in the stands during the first team matches with the analysts. So it's more of an analytical eye on things. With Murtagh's role, as soon as he went into it, I think one of the first questions was, why is it a football director? Why is it not a director of football? They couldn't even phrase it as a director of football. But you only have to look at the signings. Jadon Sancho had been in the pipeline a long time. Rafael Varane, United made him a target. He was their main one that they wanted to come in as centre half. They got that. Ronaldo only came in because an ambassador made a beeline for him because he was going to go to Manchester City. And under Ten Hag, apart from Casemiro, who John Murtagh did a lot of legwork on in terms of meeting people at Real Madrid and meeting people at Real Madrid quite early on in the summer with that one. Most of the signings under Ten Hag, they've been Ten Hag signings, no two ways about it. And that's why Ten Hag is not getting a lot of sympathy amid United's plight this season, because it's his team, it's his squad. His fingerprints are all over that squad, unfortunately for him, in quite a negative light now because of how poor the United have been this season. And if you're a sporting director or football director who's overseeing recruitment and there's no discernible pattern in terms of the way you're going about recruiting players,
you're not really doing your job, are you? Yeah.
And look, in fairness, you go back to 2019 and they talked about the cultural reset, and that's why I find it laughable that you've got pundits now saying they need a cultural reset. Look, they had one nearly 5 years ago. It didn't work. you've just got to do the right thing. You don't need a buzz phrase or a buzzword about it. You don't need to sound holistic about it. We don't need to sound like Jake Humphrey must sound like on his podcast. I've never listened to one, but you need to have a clear strategy. And in fairness, this whole thing of we want players aged between 23 and 28 and we want them to be British, it's like, okay, you've narrowed the field down a bit, but that's a clear outlook. Of course, they abandoned it after about 5 months because they signed Bruno Fernandes, and I found it quite bizarre, this whole thing of, look, we want them to be British. It's important that they're British, because at that time, was that the advisable way of going about it? No. Now you look at the depth of talent England have in a national
back
team.
in 2018, English players wise, it wasn't very deep, was it? And Harry Maguire and Wan-Bissaka were that most highly rated English players, and look how they've ended up.
Well, and you look at it now, and it is advisable, a lot more advisable to go for generational talents in the England team. But it's Harry Kane. Oh no, I don't want to deal with Daniel Levy. Fair enough, Jude Bellingham. He wanted to go to Real Madrid. United made a beeline for him 4 years ago. I reckon Declan Rice would have been attainable, but they didn't. They decided not to go near him either. Like, in terms of their recent summer transfer window, there's one thing that was lacking in it, and that was ambition. Because you look at the England player that they did sign, he was in the last year of his contract, and if I had the choice of I know it's different positions, but Maddison, Rice, Kane, Bellingham, Mount, the last player on that list that I would want, and I've said this at the time, would have been Mount. He's been a disaster so far. Højlund was not an ambitious signing, cost a lot of money, but that was not ambition. Onana, he knew the manager. And the rest of the signings are loanees or Johnny Evans coming in because he'd been released by Leicester.
The way transfers are going to work then going forward, I made a point a couple of months ago when there wasn't as much pressure under Ten Hag, and I said it could be really interesting when INEOS and Ratcliffe come in and the way they want to work with their policy and how that will affect the manager, because Ten Hag, to some extent, has been given a lot of free rein over. He's not always got everything he wanted, of course, and there's been higher targets that he's missed out on. But as you said, his fingerprints are all over this squad. So if then he's going to work with a recruitment policy and a sporting director that's saying, hang on a minute, we want to sign these kind of players, I suggested that could rock the boat a bit.
Good.
Well, I think you and Ty played it down at the time, but I'm now starting to think Ten Hag's probably not going to be here after the end of the season. I personally think he's probably not going to be INEOS's man. I mean, there's a lot of months ahead and things could change, but it does kind of feel that way. And if a new manager comes in, they're probably going to have to work within that framework as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's the way it has to be as well. And I know that you can have friction between manager and hierarchy if...
I think that's natural. There's always going to be a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, like the manager will want a player and hierarchy will say, no. And look, this was happening under Mourinho. United were vetoing some of his targets. The difference back then was that it was Ed Woodward who was vetoing it. Or Ed Woodward claimed that, the recruitment department said, don't go for that player. Like, who's in the recruitment department? Where is this recruitment department? It was almost, it was like, where's Sheikh Hassim? It was
Samuel,
kind of
for
like
anyone who's listening on an audio device, Samuel's kind of looking around the room there, gesturing.
But when we were told about this recruitment department, we, as journalists, we came out of this chat and we were like, what is it? It was a question we were asking ourselves. Have any of you heard of the recruitment department? No, nobody had heard of it. It was almost like
these are people who cover the club.
This broom cupboard where some gremlins were lingering, just looking at Y Scout or opted to see which players would be worth signing for Manchester United. But as when they gave us chapter and verse on their recruitment reboot in 2019, it did sound in certain ways quite impressive, but there were a lot of things that really did undermine it as well. I think one of the quotes was something like, Solskjaer, he would not tolerate a third choice for a certain position. And I thought, well, if 1 and 2 say no to you and you absolutely have to get a player for that position, you're going to have to go to your third choice. But I don't think United ever really got there with most positions, apart from with Van der Beek, because you had Grealish, you had Maddison, then you had Van der Beek, and Solskjaer did treat him like someone that he just didn't want. With Ten Hag, INEOS will have to lay down some ground rules there. I'd advise one of them is, if you think Keys Voss is getting any players to us, think again. because we're not going down that road. It's caused too much.
Ban him from the director's box as well.
The guy...
He's a heavily visible presence.
For someone so experienced, he is extremely tone deaf, because he's having pictures in the dugout, he's having pictures in the tunnel, calling it home, and I'm thinking, it's too close to home. And I know he's not exactly moved too many players to United, but there are things that people are hearing as well, which are not reflecting too well on him, and it doesn't reflect too well on Ten Hag as well. The amount of money they paid for Rasmus Højlund, a €10 million loan fee for a backup defensive midfielder who's going to miss a month at least of the season due to AFCON. That's really bad business as well. And of course, these two moves coincided with these two players becoming changing representation, moving to SEG. This whole focus on the Eredivisie, it's not a coincidence. I know Ten Hag has downplayed it, and yes, he has wanted certain English players, and United haven't been able to get them. But you didn't always have to go to the Eredivisie for these players. And I come back to the point about in terms of City and recruitment. I think the only player they've signed from the Eredivisie during Guardiola's time, or possibly during the Abu Dhabi ownership, was Angelino. Of course, they re-signed and they had a buyback option on. He came in for 6 months again. He was dreadful. He was culpable in some really bad defeats or certainly significant defeats to Liverpool and United. They shipped him off in the next transfer window. It's a failure, but they went about it in the right way, like bring him back in, see how he does, not up to it, off you go again. You're never going to get that with United under the current way they go about business. They're having to give academy players away because their track record with sales for a long time has just not been good enough, and they're having to recoup as much money as possible. Whoever it is, Iqbal, Charlie Savage, Matteo Mejia. Here's a profit because they're in our academy, but they're getting minimal fees for these players. And City, I know I've mentioned him before, but James Trafford, highest level he played at was League One. And they get £20 million from him, which is as much as United got for Dean Henderson, who I think...
Is there some revisionism? I think there's definitely a true point, and we've all agreed in the podcast, United should be getting more for these academy players. But for example, I saw suggestions about Teddy Menji recently. That was a nominal fee as well. It wasn't very much. But yeah, he's had success at Luton. But when you look at his injury record and stuff, there wasn't many takers. I know there was interest from France actually at the time, but then Luton came in for a good package. Charlie Savage... Reading are struggling in League One.
I think with Mengi there is revisionism. At the time, it's this lad's just got to go. He's got to have a clean break. But I suppose the fact that he got a move to a Premier League club, you maybe thought, well, should they be getting a fee where they can actually tell us what the fee is? When the club are not telling you what the fee is, it's next to nothing. They decided not to disclose what the loan fee for Van der Beek was, and I can imagine. I think I wrote in my piece. There's that scene in Moneyball where they're discussing a trade, and Brad Pitt says, "Okay, can you also stop my vending machine of soda for 3 years?" And you're thinking that's probably the price of Van der Beek's loan fee.
Who's Brad Pitt and who's Jonah Hill out of Me and You? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. But I disrupted your rhythm before because when you said if you were Ratcliffe and you were sitting at Ten Hag, let's say 3 priorities. Your first was Keys Voss. What are the other 2?
I wouldn't say Keys Voss is my first priority, but it's kind of like tongue in cheek. But yeah, it's got to be that. It's got to be, look, we're going with a recruit. Look, this is a recruitment specialist. This is the way he operates. Work with him, and then. That's probably the smart way of going about it. You've got to be succinct. Ten Hag doesn't feel like he's had his power revoked, so to speak. It feels like it's a two-way operation there. It's a collaboration, and I don't think also that Ten Hag's not stupid. He's going to realise that his hit rate in recruitment has not been good enough, but there has been. Martinez has been a success of sorts despite not barely playing this season, and he can point to that, and he can maybe offer mitigation or context on other deals that have not panned out or developed, and the players haven't developed at the speed that he would have liked. but it's got to be collaborative. And if Ten Hag is saying, look, there's this player in the Eredivisie, then I think someone's got to put their foot down.
Do you believe that he believes that his transfer strike rate is being hit and miss? I would say he would still defend it.
He was defending it the other week, but he was living in the past because he was talking about it. People were saying last season. I was thinking, yeah, that was last season. That was, what was United's last game, June the 3rd. That was 7 months ago. A hell of a lot has happened since then. And look, as in every industry, as I've said before, you're judged on what you're doing, not what you've done. Nobody's going to be saying what a great player Casemiro's been for United, because he last started a Premier League game on October the 7th against Brentford, and he was hooked at half-time because he was hopeless in the first half.
Some training ground chat then, Samuel, to end the podcast. United are open to relocating from Carrington. I mean, they only moved in in January 2000 from the Cliff, but is that a long time, 24 years to be at a training ground?
I mean, the Cliff is obviously goes back. It felt like they were there since forever, and it's still theirs. And they've had the occasional academy game there. I mean, Dortmund trained there a few years ago as well, so it still has its purpose. But I think it's a relatively short amount of time. Ideally, when you're moving to a training complex, you're thinking, well, we're here forever. Yeah. I don't think anybody when Manchester City moved to the CFA, they're not thinking, what are we going to do in a quarter of a century time? They're going to be there until the day I die, probably, and which is hopefully quite a long time away. Yeah, but I think we've both been to Carrington, God knows how many times, and just waiting to get in is an issue. Like City, you turn up, there's a guy on the door, barrier comes up, you're into the car park. At United, you're waiting on a country road, and this is a journalist. You're waiting on a country road until about 45 minutes before the press conference. Then you're beckoned through, and there's always an excuse. We're getting the room ready, or this, that, and the other. I mean, they don't have a designated press conference room.
When I went last in for the press conference when I was last there, I think I arrived at 9:13. I pulled up at the gate, and he went, "No, you're only allowed for it at 9:15." I went, it's 9:13, when it's 2 minutes, and obviously there was cars coming behind us.
Rules.
And he went, yeah, good point, actually come through. And I thought, come on, a bit of common sense.
I know. It's so that's kind of strange. If you're a first time attendant in a journalistic capacity at Carrington, you're thinking already, this is a bit strange. And obviously you drive up that country lane, and fans have cottoned on that it's not private property, which is why they wander up and down there now, and they try to be as close to the entrance and the exit as possible to get autographs or selfies off players. And then you go through the other barriers. And this season, what we've discovered is that the car park is so crammed and tiny, frankly, for Manchester United, that we're actually having to park up on the grass bank up towards the Jimmy Murphy Centre where the press conference is. So more often than not, there's not a parking space. So we're being parked up on this grass bank with, there's a little pond the other side of it, and and there's a sign up saying no swimming. It's all quite surreal, and some of the signage around the place, the red has faded on it, which is the case at Old Trafford. I think the Manchester United sign, there's a Bobby Charlton stand sign, all of them, they need a lick of paint. They gave the exterior of Old Trafford a lick of paint about 18 months ago.
Having all said that, I still do think it's not the worst in the world. I mean, it does get a bit of an unfair rap, but I think the crucial point is it's not best in class. And if they want to be best in class, it can
that's the point.
Yeah.
Look, Manchester United used to take pride in Old Trafford and Carrington. They were ahead of the curve in moving to Carrington. They were ahead of the curve in getting the North Stand expanded in 1995 to, it holds 28,000. It's bigger than probably most grounds in the country. That's one stand. They did that in 1995. Then it's, an extra tier on the scoreboard ends and the Stretford end in 2000, quadrants in, they got planning permission for that, I think, in early 2004. They didn't stand still. And that reflected the club. So Alex Ferguson, more often than not, he didn't stand still. It was always striving for perfection. That perfection may always be unattainable, but it's not going to stop you for trying to get there. They've stood still, and it's just little things. And there are big things as well, but it is little things like you see the sign and the red's faded on it, and another club would be onto that like a shot. And at United, it's littered all over the training complex. And look, Carrington is not. The facilities there are nowhere near as bad as Cristiano Ronaldo made out. The jacuzzi is not the same as it was when he was there as an 18-year-old. They did refurbish the pool area, the jacuzzi, in 2022. The canteen has been refurbished. The canteen is it's quite plush. It's impressive. It's modern.
Academy building as well.
They've got the new academy building that they installed last year. There are better facilities for the women as well. There are bespoke facilities for the women's team. I think there are about 3 or 4 buildings on the site now. But from what I understand, the issues they've got with expanding is that because it is quite a condensed area, they don't want to go onto the football pitches because, again, it's that we want to prioritise the football. And in fairness, this is a logistical issue, so they're not going to stray onto the football pitch area. And they've, it is quite vast. They must have, goodness me, maybe a dozen or maybe just under a dozen pitches, not full size pitches, but it's a huge acreage there. But because it's essentially it's a country road and there's farmland that they could buy across the road from Birch Road on that approach to the training ground. But immediately is that the right terrain to be building football pitches? You don't want cabbage patches for youngsters to be learning their trade on. There are also cables on the approach as well, so that's another issue to encounter. There was something else I think I wrote in the story, but I'm struggling to remember.
I've got the article up, so I should be able to help you, but I can't. You said prioritise the football, you said the cables, and that was it.
Yeah, but I think essentially because it's quite a condensed plot and all those buildings, they're not necessarily cobbled together, but it's, the pitches are so vast and they don't want to stray onto them. So you've not got a lot of room to manoeuvre. I mean, it really does need a new car park altogether, but they've not got the room to do that. I think they're looking to install like a plush hut, if you like, for parents who go to watch the academy games, so they can congregate in an area. But even that image at the weekend, the academy have won 11 out of 11 in the under-18s league, and they beat City on Saturday. But it's like going to a Sunday league pitch. It's just played on one of the pitches at Carrington. City, of course, if it's a home mini derby, it's getting played at the CFA, which of course is an actual stadium.
That's just made me think of Leeds Sports Village, obviously, as well, because the under-21s play their games there. You've mentioned the CFA. All the academy games are in one place for Manchester City. Yeah. It would be brilliant if that could happen at United.
Yeah, that's ideally, that's another reason why I think they should knock down Old Trafford. If they can have a mini Old Trafford in there as well, which I think the footprint is that vast that they could do, then that has to be another incentive. And look, there are going to be, you could get even a 50-50 split on fans on whether Old Trafford should be knocked down or whether you just redevelop it. It absolutely has to be on that site. I mean, I'd never say it should be moved elsewhere. I mean, it's been United's home for over a century. But they really do need their own stadium for. Look, the academy is it's been a beacon for United in the darkest of times. Whether it was the Munich air crash when they drafted in youngsters and then they beat Sheffield Wednesday in their next match in the FA Cup, and on a less mortal note, I suppose, in recent times, it's every season it's the thing to celebrate. The worst season United had in decades, a couple of years ago, they won the FA Youth Cup, and you're watching Kobe Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho excel. And
there's the only positive story that it was 21-22. That was the only positive story of that season.
Yeah, it was.
Run, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was. And Garnacho and Mainoo have been their two best players this season. You could argue. I know Mainoo was out for the first few months, but he's come in. He's untouchable already, and that's testament to the brilliant work the academy does. So you've got to champion it and give them the facilities and the platform that they deserve. And the platform they deserve, at the very least, is frankly to not have to travel to Lee Sports Village and play matches there. It's obviously that's, it's going to be a long way off until they have their own bespoke stadium for it, but that has to happen. Whether it's at Old Trafford or whether they can arrange it at Carrington somehow. I mean, I suppose you could build a stadium around one of the pitches at Carrington, but again, in terms of getting building works in and everything, that does compromise other pitches, and United say they don't want to do that.
It's the fact that Lee Sports Village got no public transport. It's no, maybe buses to be fair. There's no really trains or access. It's just a pain in the backside.
I'd always.
You have to drive. That's the thing.
Yeah, I'd always favour Altrincham, but the facilities are better at this. This is what United have said. They say that the facilities are better at Lee Sports Village, which they are. Like as a complex, it's quite impressive, and they've.
The thing is though, Altrincham doesn't get as cold as Lee Sports Village. I've been to both grounds in the winter.
And you can pop into Hale Village and go to a nice Italian afterwards, or one of the pubs there. I'd certainly be all in favour of Altrincham. They've obviously used Altrincham's ground for a long time, but I think they've been playing at Lee for about 10 years now. It must be. So it seems like that arrangement is indefinite, but hopefully it's not never ending.
That's it for today's podcast, and Samuel will have a go at the builders on our way out. So apologies if you hear any background noise, or you have heard some background noise for this episode. And thanks to listeners as usual. Check out our social platforms, head across to our YouTube channel and subscribe. We're ticking across nicely for subscribers. So have a great week and take care. Thank you.